Just when the wrestling world thought it had said goodbye to an icon, Linda Hogan, ex-wife of the late Hulk Hogan, has shattered the silence. In a shocking legal move, Linda accuses Hulk Hogan of years of abuse and demands $10 million in restitution. But is this a desperate cry for justice, or a final attempt to rewrite a legend's legacy? In this gripping exposé, we uncover the untold story of Hulk Hogan, his rise as wrestling's greatest icon, the painful truth behind closed doors, and the chilling silence of those left behind. Featuring emotional reflections, legal revelations, and insider perspectives, this video dives into the collision between myth and reality, and what happens when the man behind the muscle is no longer there to speak. Watch till the end to understand how fame, power, and silence created the perfect storm. Subscribe for more explosive wrestling documentaries and behind-the-curtain truth. Just when fans thought the drama was over, Linda Hogan drops a bombshell, accusing the late Hulk Hogan of years of abuse and demanding $10 million in compensation. Is this a cry for justice, or a cash grab? The world was still reeling from the sudden death of wrestling icon Hulk Hogan when the headlines took a dark, unexpected turn. The mourning had barely begun, tributes still pouring in from every corner of the wrestling world, when a familiar name resurfaced, not to grieve, but to accuse Linda Hogan, his ex-wife. The woman who once stood by his side during the golden era of Hulkamania. Now, in a move that stunned both fans and industry insiders, Linda filed a posthumous lawsuit, accusing the late Terry Bollea, known globally as Hulk Hogan, of long-term domestic abuse and demanding a staggering $10 million in compensation. The timing, just days after Hogan's passing, has ignited a firestorm of debate. Was this a long-delayed cry for justice? Or an opportunistic maneuver to capitalize on a legend's silence? But before we answer that question, we must rewind the clock, not to the day the lawsuit was filed, but to the day a man named Terry Bollea became Hulk Hogan, and changed professional wrestling forever. In the late 1970s, pro wrestling was still seen by many as a regional spectacle, gritty, wild, and limited to smoky arenas across America's heartland. There were stars, yes, but none with the crossover charisma to lift wrestling out of its carnival roots and place it on a global stage. Then came Hulk Hogan. He was larger than life. Muscles that stretched the limits of human anatomy, a handlebar mustache that became iconic in its own right, and a presence so magnetic that even Hollywood took notice. Born in Augusta, Georgia in 1953 and raised in Florida, Terry Bollea was a troubled teen who found solace in bodybuilding, guitar playing, and eventually professional wrestling. But it wasn't until he stepped into the ring under the moniker Hulk Hogan that destiny truly began to unfold. His rise was meteoric. With the support of Vince McMahon and the then-nascent World Wrestling Federation, Hogan wasn't just pushed, he was launched like a rocket. And America was ready. They wanted a hero. A clean-cut, muscle-bound gladiator who could defeat the foreign villains, preach vitamins and prayers, and stand for the red, white, and blue. Hogan became that hero. He didn't just win matches. He filled stadiums. He didn't just perform. He inspired. WrestleMania 3. Andre the Giant. The leg drop. The cupped hand to the ear. The immortal red and yellow. For over a decade, Hulk Hogan was wrestling. And in many ways, he still is. He was the bridge between sports and spectacle. The first wrestler to transcend the ring and become a household name. Through cartoons, talk shows, toys, movies, and merchandising, Hogan transformed himself into a cultural icon. And in doing so, he transformed wrestling itself, from a niche sport into a billion-dollar empire. Behind the scenes, however, his life was far more complex. Linda Claridge met Terry Bollea in the late 1980s. They married in 1983, in the heat of Hulkamania's rise. To the outside world, they were the ultimate power couple. A glamorous blonde married to wrestling's biggest star, raising 2 children in a mansion built by sweat, charisma, and leg drops. But as Hogan's fame grew, so did the pressure. The travel was relentless. The fans insatiable. The persona, Hogan's ever-present, all-smiling alter ego, began to consume the man behind it. Terry Bollea, the father and husband, became increasingly overshadowed by Hulk Hogan, the myth. Linda began to see the cracks first, in private moments, behind the sunglasses and media smiles, Hogan would unravel. The stress of fame. The grind of the business. The need to always perform. Over time, she alleges, that pressure mutated into something darker. Something more dangerous. The abuse wasn't always physical, she claims. Sometimes it was emotional. Sometimes verbal. Always manipulative. According to Linda's legal filing, there were years of gaslighting, intimidation, and moments of violence that never made it to the tabloids. And now, decades later, she's demanding justice, not just for herself, but for the woman who lived in the shadows of Hulkamania. Critics are skeptical. Some say she had her chance years ago. That the divorce, which concluded in 2009, awarded her a significant portion of Hogan's assets. That speaking now, when Hogan can no longer defend himself, reeks of exploitation, but others argue differently. They point to a familiar pattern seen all too often with men in power. A public image carefully polished, while private demons fester in silence. They argue that fame doesn't shield someone from accountability. If anything, it delays it. Because the higher someone climbs, the harder it becomes to call them out without being crushed by the machinery around them. And Hulk Hogan's machinery was vast. Even after the scandalous Gawker lawsuit and sex tape leaks in 2015, Hogan managed to claw his way back into public favor. WWE reinstated him to the Hall of Fame. Fans forgave. He stood in the ring once more, arm raised, basking in the adulation of those who'd grown up chanting his name. But behind the nostalgia lies complexity. And behind the yellow tights stood a man whose life, even in death, continues to raise hard questions. Was Hogan merely a product of the era? A man navigating the toxic expectations of masculinity in the 1980s and 90s wrestling world? Or was there a conscious double life, one for the cameras and another behind closed doors? Linda Hogan claims the latter. She says there were years of suppressed truths. Times when she wanted to speak but feared backlash from fans, executives, even her own family. You don't just accuse Hulk Hogan of something and walk away unscathed, one insider quoted her as saying. He wasn't just a man. He was an industry. And in many ways, that's still true. Without Hogan, there is no WrestleMania 3 record-breaking crowd. There is no Monday Night Wars. No NWO Revolution. No Attitude Era. He built the blueprint that everyone else followed, from Stone Cold to John Cena, Roman Reigns to The Rock. Every modern wrestling superstar walks in the footsteps of Hulk Hogan, whether they want to admit it or not. But Linda's accusations now cast a long shadow over that legacy. In her complaint, she outlines not just moments of violence, but patterns of coercion and control. Allegedly, there were episodes of paranoia, of Hogan accusing her of betrayal, of cutting her off financially when she questioned his decisions, of using his fame as a weapon to silence dissent. More chilling are the references to the children. Brooke and Nick Hogan were once fixtures in the reality show Hogan Knows Best, a program that painted the family as tight-knit and grounded despite the fame. But behind the scenes, Linda alleges, the family dynamic was deeply fractured. Her attorneys have suggested that the $10 million figure represents not just damages, but years of emotional harm inflicted on an entire household. The wrestling community is divided. Some defend Hogan's memory fiercely. Former colleagues, fans, and even WWE legends have come forward expressing disbelief, insisting that Terry was always respectful and loving to his family. Others, more quietly, acknowledge that the wrestling world has a long, painful history of protecting its icons, until it no longer can. What complicates the matter further is Hogan's lack of ability to respond. Death is final. And with his passing, the chance for rebuttal, for context, for confrontation, is gone. Now, the only voices that remain are those left behind. And in that vacuum, stories, long suppressed, often rise with painful clarity. So how should fans remember Hulk Hogan now? Is he still the man who told millions to believe in themselves, to say their prayers and eat their vitamins? Or is he something more human, more flawed, a titan whose towering legacy now wrestles with posthumous controversy? Perhaps both can be true. Legacies are rarely simple. Especially not for someone like Hogan, who lived his life in extremes, extreme success, extreme fame, and now, perhaps, extreme scrutiny. He was the face of a generation. The muscle behind a movement. The symbol of a sport's evolution from backyard brawls to billion-dollar business, but he was also a man. A husband. A father. And according to Linda, a man who inflicted wounds deeper than any suplex or steel chair ever could. Still, in the hearts of millions, there remains a boyhood memory of Hulk Hogan standing tall in the ring, ripping his shirt in half, roaring with energy that felt like electricity. A man who, in that moment, was invincible. Now, the illusion of that invincibility has shattered. Linda's lawsuit is ongoing. Whether it will proceed to trial or be quietly settled remains to be seen. But the questions it raises are already echoing through the wrestling world. How do we separate the hero from the human? Can we mourn a man's death and still confront his demons? Can an icon be both a savior of an industry and a source of pain for those closest to him? The truth, like wrestling itself, may lie somewhere between performance and reality. Hulk Hogan gave wrestling its wings. He took it from smoke-filled gymnasiums and launched it into pop culture. But perhaps the greatest lesson his story now teaches us is this: behind every legend is a life. And behind every myth, a man. A man who may have changed the world, but couldn't escape the reckoning waiting at the end. As the legal filings circulated and headlines blared across mainstream and wrestling media alike, one question loomed larger than all others: where were Brooke and Nick? The silence from Hulk Hogan's children was deafening. Brooke, once portrayed as Daddy's little girl, had stood proudly by her father's side on red carpets, in reality TV confessionals, and during the height of his wrestling comeback tours. Nick, the more rebellious of the two, had also basked in the glow of his father's fame, often appearing in promotional materials as a budding celebrity in his own right. But now, with their father's reputation under siege from the woman who helped raise them, both had disappeared from public view. No Instagram stories. No tweets. No interviews. Not even a cryptic statement of mourning or defense. It was as if they had been swallowed whole by the legacy they were born into. A legacy now contaminated by accusations of abuse, manipulation, and betrayal. Some say their silence is strategy, others believe it's grief, but a growing number of insiders suggest something more complicated: that Brooke and Nick are caught between the man they loved and the mother they still share. That behind closed doors, there's a family being ripped in two all over again, this time with no cameras, no scripts, and no chance to cut to commercial. And then there's WWE, the global empire that Hulk Hogan helped build, arguably from the ground up, has thus far maintained its own silence. No official statement from TripleH. No remarks from Stephanie McMahon. Not even the kind of canned condolences typically issued during controversy. Just a social media post mourning Hogan's death the day it happened, and then, nothing. But sources backstage paint a much different picture. At WWE headquarters in Stamford, Connecticut, internal discussions have grown tense. According to one executive, speaking under the condition of anonymity, there's panic. Hogan's name is sewn into the fabric of this company. But if these allegations gain traction, we'll have no choice but to make decisions we're not ready to make. That decision? Whether or not to erase Hulk Hogan. Again, this wouldn't be the first time. In 2015, Hogan was removed from WWE programming and the Hall of Fame after leaked audio revealed him using racist language. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Sponsors pulled out. Fans revolted. Merchandise disappeared overnight. But in time, after public apologies and quiet reconciliation behind the scenes, WWE reinstated Hogan. He was brought back as a legend, appearing at WrestleMania, hosting events, and giving speeches meant to smooth over the cracks. But this time, the cracks run deeper. This isn't about language. It's not about a private tape or a locker room insult. This is about legacy. Blood. Family. Violence. It's about whether the man millions called a hero was, in fact, something far more destructive behind closed doors. One former wrestler, himself a survivor of domestic abuse, spoke anonymously to the press. "We've all got demons in this business. But if Linda's telling the truth, this goes beyond scandal. It's betrayal on the most personal level. How do you look at his Hall of Fame ring and not see a symbol of silence? That's the question WWE now faces, because the Hall of Fame isn't just a collection of names, it's a pantheon of immortality. And Hogan isn't just another inductee. He's the pillar. The cornerstone. The godfather of modern sports entertainment. To remove him would be like removing the foundation of the house. Yet to keep him, in the face of unrefuted allegations, may damage WWE in ways the company has never seen. Fans, too, are divided. Some have taken to social media to express outrage, not at Linda, but at the timing. Why now, they ask. Why speak up when the man can't defend himself? Others have countered that abuse survivors often live in silence for years, especially when the abuser holds significant power and cultural influence. But perhaps the most heartbreaking reactions are from those who no longer know what to believe. They grew up idolizing Hulk Hogan. They dressed as him for Halloween. They cheered when he body slammed Andre the Giant. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was hope. And now, they're grappling with the possibility that the man who inspired them may have inflicted pain on those closest to him. What happens when the hero of your childhood becomes the villain of someone else's life story? That's the question echoing across message boards, podcasts, and fan forums. For some, the answer is to separate the art from the artist, to acknowledge Hogan's contributions while condemning the man behind them. For others, such separation is impossible. How can you celebrate someone who may have terrorized his own family? One post read. A Hall of Fame should honor greatness, not pretend it came without consequence. And yet, even in this storm of controversy, there's another perspective. A quieter one. A more uncomfortable one, that maybe Hulk Hogan was both a legend and a flawed man. A champion in the ring, and a man haunted by insecurity and ego outside it. That perhaps greatness and darkness can exist in the same person, and that acknowledging one doesn't erase the other. It's a truth wrestling fans may need to grapple with, not just for Hogan, but for many of the icons they've placed on pedestals, because wrestling, at its core, is about heroes and villains. About stories of redemption, betrayal, triumph, and downfall. And in the story of Hulk Hogan, we now have all of it, written not by WWE scriptwriters, but by life itself. So what happens next? Linda's legal team has already indicated their intent to pursue the matter in civil court. They've also hinted at a forthcoming memoir, one that will reveal the untold truths behind the House of Hogan. WWE, meanwhile, has reportedly begun reviewing its digital archive, including match footage, documentaries, and merchandise bearing Hogan's name and likeness. The Hall of Fame induction page remains active, for now, but insiders suggest discussions are already underway about whether to suspend or quietly de-emphasize Hogan's presence. No decision has been finalized. But the fear is palpable. One misstep, and the entire foundation could crack. As for the fans, some have already turned away. Others wait for more information. And a few still hold out hope that this is all a misunderstanding, that the Hogan they grew up loving wasn't a monster in disguise. But the truth is rarely simple. It often arrives like a steel chair to the back, unexpected, painful, and irreversible. In the final act of Hulk Hogan's life, we are not watching a final match. We are witnessing a reckoning. A trial not in the courts of law, but in the hearts and minds of those who believed in the legend. Whether he's remembered as a hero, a villain, or something in between, one thing is certain: the story of Hulk Hogan is no longer just about what happened in the ring. It's about what happened when the cameras turned off, the crowd went home, and the man behind the myth was left alone with his truth. And now, the world is listening. As the dust from the initial headlines began to settle, another war emerged, one not in courtrooms or wrestling arenas, but in the media itself. Talk show segments, breaking news tickers, YouTube reaction videos, tabloid covers, wrestling podcasts, TikTok feeds flooded with theories, opinions, and outrage. Everyone had something to say, but very few truly listened, because beneath the media frenzy and the polarizing noise, something deeper stirred. A hidden truth rarely acknowledged in public discourse, that Linda Hogan had been fighting a private war long before she ever stepped into a courtroom, or a marriage. This wasn't just about money. Not entirely. It wasn't even just about Hulk Hogan. This was about the systemic culture surrounding wrestling royalty. A culture that had elevated larger-than-life men into gods, and relegated their wives, those who witnessed their worst moments, to footnotes or accessories. From the beginning, Linda Hogan was cast in a role she didn't audition for. She wasn't just Terry Bollea's wife. She was Mrs. Hulk Hogan. And that title came with invisible shackles, expectations to smile on cue, to stay silent when the cameras stopped rolling, to play the part of the devoted partner while the man she loved became both a brand and a business. Linda endured that life for over 2 decades, through Hulk's soaring highs, the WrestleMania triumphs, the movie deals, the merchandising empire. And through his devastating lows, the steroid scandals, the racial slur controversy, the infamous sex tape, and the public divorce. She stood at the edge of the spotlight, always present, rarely heard. But now, in the wake of Hogan's death, she had found her voice, and for some, that was the most dangerous revelation of all. Critics were quick to label her accusations as opportunistic. They called her greedy, bitter, vengeful. They pointed to the alimony, the settlements, the reality show money. What more does she want, they asked. But that question, in itself, revealed the very heart of the problem, because what Linda wanted, what she had always wanted, according to close confidants, was never about the millions. It was acknowledgement, recognition of the pain she had endured behind closed doors. Validation that her suffering wasn't a script for reality TV, but a real, lived experience. And most importantly, a reckoning for the man who had been idolized as untouchable for decades. One source close to Linda described years of emotional hostage-taking, gaslighting, public shaming, being blamed for everything that went wrong in their family. She was made to feel crazy, the source said. But she wasn't. She was surviving. Another source, a former family friend, revealed that Linda had attempted to write a tell-all memoir years earlier, but was strongly advised against it by legal counsel. She was warned that she'd be crushed. That Hogan would sue her into oblivion. That she'd lose whatever public sympathy she had left. So she stayed quiet. Until now, Linda's silence had been broken. And the world wasn't prepared for what came pouring out. At the heart of her legal filings are deeply unsettling accusations, not just of physical violence, but of calculated emotional warfare. Allegations that Hogan used his legal team, his money, his influence in the media to silence, isolate, and intimidate her. Linda alleges that even after their divorce, Hogan made it nearly impossible for her to find peace. She claims he launched quiet smear campaigns, threatened financial ruin, and painted her as the villain in a marriage that had long since fractured under the weight of ego and fame. The $10 million lawsuit, her attorneys argue, is about symbolic restitution, a public price tag for private suffering. And yet, that price tag continues to divide, because for every person who supports her claim, another sees it as an attempt to destroy the memory of a cultural icon. But maybe that's what makes this story so important, because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Heroes are not always good men. They can be inspiring and cruel, charismatic and controlling. They can lift up millions while tearing apart the few who know them best. And Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, was all of those things at once. Wrestling fans are now facing a reckoning of their own. They are being asked to re-examine their childhoods, to question the moments they spent cheering from the couch or standing in arenas with foam fingers and red and yellow shirts. They are being asked to decide whether legacy is untouchable, or whether truth should be allowed to tarnish even the most glittering icons. Some say Linda Hogan is rewriting history, but others argue she's finally telling it, because the truth is, history has always been told by those with the loudest microphones, and for years, Hogan controlled every stage he walked on. He was the narrator of his own myth. The ring was his pulpit. The fans his congregation. The spotlight, his absolution. But in death, that spotlight has shifted. Now, it shines on those who lived in his shadow, and what it reveals is not just a fallen hero, but a fractured legacy. A man who made wrestling what it is today, but perhaps at a cost far greater than anyone imagined. In her latest public statement, Linda said, "I loved Terry once. But loving someone shouldn't mean losing yourself. I stayed silent for too long. Now I speak, not because he's gone, but because I'm still here." And with those words, the story of Hulk Hogan takes on a new chapter, one not defined by championships, but by the consequences of unchecked power. As fans look back, they will remember the moments that defined an era, the body slam on Andre, the face-off with Ultimate Warrior, the red and yellow, the roar of the crowd, but they must also remember the quieter moments, the woman who waited in the wings. The family caught in the crossfire of legacy. The cost of building an empire on charisma, dominance, and silence. This is no longer just a wrestling story. It's a human story. A cautionary tale about fame, family, and the secrets we bury beneath applause. The bell has rung on the final round of Hulk Hogan's legacy. Now the world must decide what kind of victory it truly was.